One of the most common discussions I have with potential new coaching clients, especially those with little to no training experience, is some variation of, I want to learn good techniques so I don't get hurt in training. This idea that the way you move in the gym environment is the ultimate arbiter of whether you get injured or not is a myth that's been sold to you for a long time in the fitness industry by professionals with clickbaity headlines and red cross green tick Instagram infographics. In this video, I want to look at some of the factors that do influence your injury risk and the role that technique plays in training depending on the goal of your training experience. The human body is a collection of complex and dynamic systems that are all interconnected in a way that ensures nothing really happens in isolation. Every aspect of your day-to-day life has an influence on how you respond to stress, how you respond to training, and our experience of pain and injury. The reality is that the argument you had with your boss before you left for work to go to the gym is probably going to play a more significant role in your risk of lower back injury than the way you deadlift. By reducing the discussion of injury risk or injury prevention to one factor, i.e. good technique, ultimately I think we're then reducing our ability to see the big picture. There are so many factors that influence how you respond to training and the risk of injury and things like that. And by only focusing on one aspect, we lose sight of potential low-hanging fruit in how we can get more out of any athlete's training experience by ticking boxes that are maybe more important than the exact angle of your toe in the way you squat. Here's a good infographic to show you a little bit of an insight into some of the factors that influence injury risk in a training or sports setting. As you can see, there's a multitude of things from things like your genetic history down to nutrition, sleep, life stress, emotional state, all kinds of other aspects that many of which are within our control and many of which are not. When we focus on just one aspect of that, we're losing all of these complex connections and ultimately just ignoring huge aspects of the training process in a way that's going to reduce our overall success. Instead of thinking about the role of technique in injury risk as a binary state, where we think about good positions or movements and bad positions or movements, it's better to consider the idea of graded exposure. As a system, the human body is incredibly adaptable and will adapt to just about any stress placed upon it, as long as that stress is presented in a way that allows time to facilitate that adaptive process. When you're first exposed to a movement or a position, your brain hasn't been there before and has to create a model for how to move smoothly and efficiently through that range of motion. When we add a little bit of load, the brain gets a little bit more feedback and is often better able to put you into a position that feels safe and strong and comfortable. By giving you time to develop these mental models and first exposing you to light loads and building that up over time, we then allow you to create a really solid understanding of how to move your body in space through that range of motion under load. If we rush into this process too quickly by, say, doing a 1 rep max in your first deadlift session, it's not that the load itself, the movement itself, or any of the positions that you get to are inherently bad and the one reason that you got hurt or that you tweaked something. But instead, it's that you don't have the capability of responding to the stress in that position under that amount of load because you haven't practiced and developed the strength and control to do so. Once we've established that good technique isn't the only factor that's involved in injury risk, it's important then to look at where good technique is actually important and how we can apply that in a training context depending on what the goal of your training process is. When it comes to performance in a general training context, we're really looking for good enough, not perfect. Letting the fear of doing it wrong get in the way of working really hard will ultimately be a significant rate limiter on your performance and in the long term really affect the results you get in training. There are a few questions that you can think about as you perform any new movement that'll give you a pretty good indicator of whether you're doing things in a way that's going to be conducive to success in the long term. Do you feel safe and relatively comfortable while you perform the movement? Are you able to move consistently from rep to rep across a whole set? Are you able to withstand the load added to the movement in a way that doesn't affect the consistency between reps? Does the movement feel smooth and relatively controlled through the whole range of motion? And are you feeling the muscles that you're intended to feel working in that movement? For example, in a squat, do you feel like your quads are doing some of the work? If you answer yes to all of those questions, chances are the position you're in and the technique you're using is probably good enough for most contexts. My general rule is always, if it feels sketchy, it's probably sketchy. If it feels good, it's probably good. And for most people who are entering a gym with the goal of just feeling stronger and fitter and healthier, that's probably good enough. The difference in this discussion comes into play when we talk about things like strength sports, powerlifting, strongman, and weightlifting. In these sports, the movements that you're performing in the gym itself have a very significant skill component that can be a really important part of your performance in the competition environment. Like any sports, powerlifting, strongman, and weightlifting all have an element of technical proficiency that, when you get to an elite level, really makes a significant difference in your ability to perform. In this context, we're always looking to develop the skill, not because it reduces injury risk, but because you can improve aspects of the way you lift and ultimately get more out of the lifts on the competition platform when it matters most. In that process, we change a little bit about the lens we use to view training because we're including the aspect of skill development in a way that's a little bit more higher priority than it would be for a general training context. In the same vein, it's important to remember that you should still never really let the idea of perfect get in the way of good enough, because the idea of perfect in both the general training context and in the strength sports context doesn't really exist. If the repetition is perfect, if your position is always perfect, you're probably not trying hard enough and you probably need to put more load on the bar. Hopefully this video has helped you realize that the way you're moving in training is probably good enough and that what we can do is get you in the gym and train hard. Consistent hard work over a long period of time will ultimately get you better results than worrying about nuances in foot position or other 1% aspects of the way you move in a way that prevents you from actually putting load on the bar when it counts.